I'm Eric Miscoll with EMS Now, and welcome to this edition of the Eric Miscoll Show. Before we get into the topic for the day, as always, I'd like to thank my co-host Phil Stoughton for getting up early in Australia and joining with us this morning for him, this evening or afternoon for me here. Also, to our audience, I'd like to just remind you that you are on mute. So if you wish to pose a question, we ask that you, and we invite you to do that using the question tab at the bottom of the screen. This is being recorded and will be rebroadcasted hopefully this next Monday on EMS Now. So with the housekeeping chores out of the way, let me begin. Our topic today is restoring U.S. manufacturing competitiveness. There's a theme that has been expressed for decades now, probably in the industry, about how the U.S. has lost its competitiveness and how we must innovate to catch up. I actually did a quick search this morning just on the topic itself to see kind of what it would reference, and I pulled up lots of articles from various esteemed institutions talking about this issue for the last few decades. And then I arranged for President Biden yesterday to be in Dearborn, Michigan, and make some comments about this issue. And he stated emphatically that the U.S. can manufacture anything, and that the future is going to be made in America. So the timing couldn't have been better for our show here. Obviously, he was talking about the automotive industry. We had this show planned around electronics manufacturing and invited the two guests who I'll introduce now. We have with us today Mr. Tom Edman, who's the president and CEO of TTM Technologies, and Mr. John Mitchell, who is the president and CEO of the IPC. Gentlemen, welcome both of you. Thank you for joining us today. Let me begin, as I always do, by introduce yourselves and your organizations for the benefit of our audience. And Tom, why don't I begin with you?
Sure. So yes, I'm Tom Edman, CEO of TTM Technologies. For those of you who don't know TTM, we are a printed circuit board and RF solutions provider. We service a number of markets. Aerospace and defense is our largest at about 35% of our revenue. And then the balance goes into a number of different commercial markets. In the printed circuit board world, we operate about 24 facilities globally. 16 of those are in North America. And then overall about 19,000 employees in the company. And really looking forward to today's discussion. Should be very interesting. Thank you for having me on.
Certainly. And John?
Yeah, so I'm John Mitchell, as you mentioned. I'm the president and CEO of IPC. IPC, if you're unaware, is a trade association for the electronics industry globally. We have thousands of companies that are members all over the world. TTM is one of those esteemed members as well. We really focus on 4 different areas. We're probably best known for our standards development activity, where we work with industry to create those standards, and IPC shepherds that process to ensure that electronics can be made and manufactured in the best ways possible to be reliable and secure and all of those things. Second area is education. We provide training and certification across the globe. The third area, advocacy, which I'm sure we'll touch on today. And then the fourth area is, of course, solutions, where we listen as we're talking with the members. We hear common challenges across the globe in industry, and then we work to provide solutions with the industry to those challenges. And usually those solutions take the form of either standards, education, or advocacy, or a combination of such. We are not nearly as many employees as Tom has. We're about 150 people, but if you count our volunteer groups, we actually do rival this size. Pretty big. So a lot of volunteers across the globe. So that's what helps us get the work done for this great industry.
Good. Excellent. Well, thank you both for that. Let me, I said at the beginning, this is such a big topic. Hopefully we can do it some justice today and may only scratch the surface, but let me begin kind of in a big picture way and ask you kind of, what is your view of the current state of U.S. manufacturing competitiveness? And John, why don't I just stay with you on that one?
Sure. I think, over the years, the U.S. has, for actually at the time, very good reasons, from a business sense, really let a lot of their manufacturing capability move around the globe. And as that capability and ever-growing expertise moves out, you begin to lose that cutting edge. Experts retire, new technologies arise, business models evolve. And really, if you're not in the middle of actually building the latest and greatest stuff, you're going to lose touch and capability over time. And I think that's largely where we're at today.
Mhm.
Maybe
Yeah,
as an initial answer.
Yeah, no, it's good. Tom, how do you see it?
Sure, and I'll talk to the printed circuit board industry, and I think your audience is very familiar with this. But if you step back to where were we 20 years ago, there, about 25% of printed circuit board production was in the United States. Where are we today? About 4% of global production is in the United States. If you look at sheer numbers of printed circuit board players, back then 350, maybe, up, depends on how you count, but 350 to 400 players. Now we're less than 150 in the US. Industry capacity shrunk, really devastated in the US. If you really think about large facilities, we operate two of the remaining large facilities, one in Chippewa Falls, Wisconsin, one in Forest Grove, Oregon. But we've completely moved those facilities really to defense business and really pilot production kind of volumes. Everything else has gone to China. So as we get into the discussion, I think if you just keep that front and center, it's really an illustration of what John talked about, that our manufacturing companies, our customers made a decision to focus on Asia supply for favorable pricing, and our industry followed. And as a result, you look today, about 55% of production of printed circuit boards is in China. And that has been on an increasing trend and looks to increase for the next several years. So, really a dramatic shift in 20 years in terms of where production has been located.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think when you look at the PCB industry, it's really interesting that it probably started to shift to Asia before as much of the EMS industry did. And I was talking to Eric about this before we were on the show, and the ease of being able to ship a printed circuit board around the world, the speed at which you can do that, the fact that you can use air freight economically makes that, even for prototypes, makes that very possible. So it started with very high volume, probably as early as the end of the 80s and the 90s. And then, then it came further and further down. But I think when you think about restoring US manufacturing competitiveness, which is what we want to talk about, I think we have to go back almost to the fundamental of why do we want to do that? Do we want to do it for supply chain security? Do we want to do it to create jobs? Because to a certain extent, if the US is going to have a competitive PCB industry and possibly a competitive manufacturing industry in a lot of other sectors, it's going to be heavily automated. So it's not going to return the number of jobs that were there in the 1990s. John, do you have a view on why the government wants to do it? Does it see it as a key part of economic recovery, or is the supply chain security element equally strong?
I think there's equal balance between a lot of different issues. From the economic perspective, obviously, with COVID this past year, that just brought a lot of things that people were concerned about. You saw in the Trump administration, there was concerns about the trade imbalance. And so they engaged a lot of tariffs, and that highlighted some supply chain weaknesses, if you will, or resiliency of it. But then with COVID, boy, it just, escalated that exponentially, where people just said, wow, we had no idea just how dependent American manufacturing was on several different locations. I mean, China's been highlighted, but it's not just China. A lot of things are manufactured all over the place and not just here in the US. So I think there's definitely an economic perspective to it, but there's also a security aspect to it. Because of COVID, having that ability in times of crisis to manage yourself is also an area that is important. And then in a very uncharacteristic thing in the US government, there's bipartisan support for an anti-China type of discussion that's going on right now. So I think those three factors are very prevalent in the U.S. As you hear from the U.S. government. You've got economic, which ties to both jobs as well as just the financial. You've got security of the industry as well as just some. Right now, there's anti-China sentiment.
Yeah, how do you see that, Tom? Because I'm guessing you talked about the fact that you've got more plants in the US than you've got elsewhere, but you've probably got more staff in China than you've got elsewhere. That's my guess. How do you see that, and do your customers see it the same way as the government, or do they just want the lowest cost PCB?
And that's a moving target, if you will. I think there's a lot of we're certainly having a lot of different discussions around this. So from overall, you're absolutely right. By the way, the bulk of our employees are in China. If you took all of our U.S. facilities and put them together, you'd fit into one of our facilities in China.
I suspected so. Yeah.
The scale is very different. But when we talk to our customers about sort of where their thinking is, and they're having board level discussion about this, it really comes back to that. It's the supply chain resiliency piece of it that they're really keyed in on, and there's a willingness. If you go back a few years, you would not have had a discussion around a premium. What kind of premium is required to have that insurance, if you will. Today, there's a willingness to talk about that. I think there's still discomfort with how high that premium might have to be. If you move that production certainly into the United States. Now we look at a heavily automated facility that will help. It has to be large enough to have a certain scale to it that can be competitive, and then you really got to bring the infrastructure along with it, because that's the the real critical piece here is, yes, shipping costs for PCBs are not that high, but shipping costs for the materials, the material
copper-clad laminates,
can be tremendous. And so that infrastructure at a reasonable cost has to come along with it. And so at the end of the day, it's going to start with the OEMs, their demand. I think, John and I certainly share the view that the Defense Department could help encourage that demand, could help the OEMs to experience that demand, and help therefore with the supply chain resiliency infrastructure. There's certainly actions the government can take to encourage this, but from our perspective, it really is the OEMs that has to start with their thinking process.
Yeah, I think what I've found really interesting during the crisis was initially, obviously, factories in China were shut down and supply chain dependability or resilience became an issue. You were probably ramping up volumes in the US. But then China had to step in when you had to close those factories in the US because of COVID. So throwing globalization under the bus is a little bit of a risky strategy, I think. So we have to think carefully about what the ideal supply chain looks like, what the ideal scenario for the US is. And for me, that's kind of a fundamental part to get right before you just start to throw money at it. And I'm a bit of a digital evangelist, so I've always thought that, if the government is going to throw money at it, let's have them throw money at stuff that's going to get us an industry that leapfrogs the industry we've got there, that is far more automated, because probably the US has fallen behind in those 20 years in terms of high volume manufacturing technology. So I think there's an interesting debate about what do we actually want in America. We don't want to build Shenzhen in Southern California. That isn't going to work. We want to build something else. And if you look at it from a PCB side, Tom, what do you think is, what kind of business do you see as being able to be made competitively and practical to reshore to the US.
Yeah, I think you really, that was a terrific description. I think where, if you do look at where we've gone in China with volume facilities, there have been some seriously, very impressive technology advancements there, built around mass production of printed circuit boards. You would not want, I personally don't think you would want to bring that back on shore. But what you would want to bring to the U.S. would be a heavily automated Industry 4.0, data-based process, and there's an opportunity, I think, that to bring that approach with a smaller commercial facility, at least in the get-go, that where you minimize the touch labor. You really focus on where the industry is going in terms of advanced technology, and certainly that ties to the silicon direction, right? So silicon moving down to the 7 to 9 nanometer type area node, and the boards following it. You're looking at miniaturization requirements, a need for additive technologies, and a automation requirement that. All of which really, fit into what could be generated or supplied out of a number of U.S. Suppliers, as well as a global supply base. But I think if you think about it that way, it's a different. And by the way, the energy source, you start thinking today, the energy source, you can start thinking about alternative energy now at reasonable cost levels as an energy source. Wastewater treatment and recycling have advanced to the point where we can recycle so much of what is produced that there's real, it's not the old PCB industry anymore.
Yeah. Well, I think, and I think that's that's the really important point that I think you're talking about is, let's build the next generation of manufacturing in the US. Let's not try and build Shenzhen in Southern California. I think that's really important. And that's, really that fundamental question of what kind of manufacturing do we want to bring? What kind of manufacturing jobs do we want in the US? And you've got to have a handle on that before you figure out how to do it. What's your view, John? You look like
Sorry, I'm ready to jump in on about 7 of those points, but didn't want to step on people. I think you guys are right. If you're going to bring things back, I mean, look at with the Trump administration, when they instituted the tariffs, you had a great exodus out of China. By and large, it didn't come back to the US. Okay, it went to South Asia, it went to Mexico. It did not come here. So why didn't it come here? Still, the cost of labor is very high. The cost of regulations, the regulatory burdens here in the US are prohibitive for something. So if they really want to bring it back, you have to look at all the many different aspects, the tax structure, et cetera, building a new factory right now. So I agree with what you're talking about, whether it's PCB or otherwise. When you build a new facility or bringing facilities back here, it's going to be heavily automated. You need a new workforce. And if you're going to put R&D money into it, so a lot of the discussion here in the US government has been focused on getting down to even 2 nano as far as manufacturing capability, and new semiconductors, AI, and quantum computing. Another area that I think we ought to be looking at is green materials. So should we be rethinking how if you want to leapfrog things, rethink how we're building these devices at all, so you don't have as much reliability on raw materials, which are also scarce and limited in availability. So if you're going to invest in a few things there, but even if you invest in that, let's say we created, the world's greatest semiconductor chip. Here it is. It's 1 nanometer. It's amazing, and we're building them. And guess what? We don't have the technology or the ecosystem, as Tom was talking about, the other parts of the supply chain. So you end up shipping it offshore anyway, and you lose that manufacturing capability. So when I see the government putting, $40 billion into a fab, I'm excited about that. I think that's a good thing for the U.S. However, in parallel to that, I think you need another $1 or $2 billion set up for the rest of the ecosystem. That's really about all it would take to make a significant leap forward in the rest of the ecosystem's technology as well to support that. And that's a lot of what we've been advocating for as we talk with government officials.
Yeah, did Korea just announce 700 billion over 9 years into the semiconductor industry?
Yeah, I saw that.
Yes.
Yeah,
That's a phenomenal number, isn't it? And they're already leaders in that sector.
That's
So
right.
it's pretty scary. Eric.
And maybe we can start using the trillion number. The US government seems to be throwing that number around pretty easily nowadays.
It's a good number.
Yeah, we're quick with those. But I guess my question is what do we need to do first, right? What needs to happen? Because this has gotten, as I said at the beginning, there's a lot written about this over the last 20 years, right? And then that we've lost our, we need to move this in a post-pandemic world. How do we turn all these good words and thoughts into actions to actually accomplish what we're trying to pursue? You know, what do you do first? And Tom, maybe I'll go with you. What do you?
John's got it. I'll let John.
I was gonna.
All right.
Yeah, and I would add to that, John. When you're looking at what you do first and government relationships, a big question is: do they get it? Do they understand the manufacturing industry? It's your job to make them understand. So yeah, hopefully it's yes.
So they're coming along. It's a slow path. It's a big government, right? So compared with where they were, 7-8 years ago, yes, they're understanding. They're starting to talk about ecosystem, but you still hear a lot just about the semiconductor industry as being the only answer. So where do you start? It's a tough question. So you have to have, say you build a mega factory and you have this ecosystem. If you don't have demand for it, so there's a lot of this chicken and egg syndrome going on. So one of the places we've been focusing on is the Defense Department. So right now, the U.S. Defense Department requires a lot of its manufacturing to be done in secure or allied locations. And so if we could start there with the requirements saying, okay, look, if you're going to use it in this intellectually secure area, let's require that to start with. And that can, there can be an infusion to help with existing processes to really bring that up to snuff, if you will, or up to the consumer electronic level, while you're investing in the R&D that's going to be a longer path. And we need skilled people. I mean, so just because you can build a building doesn't mean you have the expertise. So that's part of the reason IPC has been really focused on really two fronts. You'll see in a lot of our materials, we're focused on the factory of the future because that automation and making sure that that's there. But coupled with that comes right along is a skilled workforce and providing the technology so that we can, or using technology so that we can rapidly take somebody literally from nowhere and get them involved in the electronics industry in 2 days. And then from there, they can, proceed on their career to be, moving into this electronics industry. So, that's where I'd start. I'd start with something that's focused, that's already kind of here, raise that level while you're building the R&D. But it's not just here's the next step in a simple stair step. There's a lot of parallel paths that need to have different timeframes that are going simultaneously. I'm sorry, it's a complex issue.
No, it certainly is. And anything to add to that, or?
Yeah, to the demand signal point, and I'll, simple example, the Defense Department classifies COTS applications, as you know. We have our ITAR requirements, and the industry's done an excellent job of servicing the ITAR requirements out there. But then there's the very large category of COTS requirements, so commercial off the shelf. Well, you start to dive into that. If you are, as the Defense Department, putting out a 5G network, do you want your network hardware to be built offshore in potentially unsecure environments? I think the answer is no, you probably don't. And that's where a demand signal comes in. So if you start moving into COTS areas of importance, at that point, then the Defense Department, I think, would naturally push for domestic sources and alternatives. And that would provide a demand signal to the OEMs that they could then respond to, leading to demand from domestic sources. So something as simple as that at least allows our system to work in a very positive way. And then we have to address really what John was addressing, which is, our labor force. So immigration, we need immigration. We need that's a lifeblood. That provides vitality into the technology industry. And so we need that. We need STEM education. We need to continue to put resources there. We need to give our veterans opportunities to transition into industry, into our industry. Those things have to come, but I always start with the demand signal. I think that's where
if I can jump on the COTS piece as well, so it's not like this isn't being heard. So we've got a first initial step. It's not a great step, but it's an initial step that they at least recognize that needs to be studied. There's legislation right now that's being proposed to implement exactly what Tom's talking about to hopefully, signal that, because he makes a great point. If you're going to have this, whatever secret product built, and then you're going to transmit it across unsecured lines, how secret is it? Securing up, that is one way to make sure that the entire system is more secure. It was a big leap, so they didn't quite take it last year. They just took the study step of it last year. So hopefully we'll get a little bit further this year.
Yeah, having a look at a big leap is easier than making one, isn't it?
Yeah.
Tom, from a PCB.
I've heard you.
Go ahead, Eric.
Let me just ask, because both of you gentlemen have mentioned kind of the OAM, this, obviously that we need the government to lead, and it has certain powers that hopefully are used in a positive way here.
Wisely.
You both referenced the OEM in this. And I'm thinking about, with this, the whole issue of national security issues that came out of the post-pandemic, how do you see that that rebalancing almost between kind of corporate interests and national interests of these OEMs? Is that a discussion? Does that have to be an influence? Tom, you're nodding your head.
Yeah. No, I think again, I think that's exactly. I don't think anyone, including TTM, is talking about our huge volume manufacturing shifts. What needs to happen, the discussion I think that is happening with OEMs is, a portion of that capacity, they have to be thinking about in terms of geographies where they need to be located. It's not just North America, it would also apply to Europe as well.
Right.
And then the premium that would be associated with, what does that mean in terms of overall supply chain costs to their companies? Boy, is that a different discussion, right? So that's happening. It is happening, which is really exciting, I think, for all of us to hear that that's happening now. Starting to then implement, make these things, turn that into a reality. That's another step. It would be helped by some government encouragement, for sure. But that, it's that sustained commitment. Clearly, whether you're a printed circuit board or an EMS company or a silicon provider, you're talking about significant capital requirements into a facility. So it has to be a sustained commitment that we're looking at here, and that's the other critical piece. A short-term shift is not going to do it. It really needs to be sustained.
Yeah, and it needs to not be. Sorry, John. I was going to say it needs to not be isolated, because there's a whole supply chain, that starts with materials that come out of the earth. And a lot of those have shifted with the industry as the industry has gone to Asia. We look at titanium, we look at all kinds of materials, and copper clad laminates are a good example. There aren't many laminate facilities in the US anymore.
That's right.
Yeah, for sure. No, I was just going to address, Eric, you mentioned the the nationalistic perspective, of companies. I think it's part of the equation, but as Tom was alluding to, at least I think you were alluding to, Tom, it's still part of a larger business equation. So those national interests are now a fact, more of a factor than they ever were. But still, is it going to overcome a 2-to-1 profit margin from building it in Mexico? No, probably not. But they might choose Mexico over, China, because now you have, the USMCA agreement, which makes things a little bit more attractive there. So the regionalization approach, whether it's Europe or North America or Asia, I think is a trend we're going to see. And it may not be, as Tom said, 100% of your production doesn't automatically shift regionally, but you'll have enough capacity to deal with different challenges to the supply chain. You might have your major supplier might still be in Asia, but your secondary supplier might be in Mexico, and then you might have another one in Michigan. So you have the options to buy or utilize different parts of of regionality in order to secure and have a resilient supply chain, and also meet those needs as things take time to grow in different areas.
Yeah. Hey, Tom, why is there very little PCB manufacturing in Mexico compared to EMS?
Very good question. That when I asked that question, I think there are historical reasons. If you think about it today, it's you'd have to find an area with the right amount of water. Now you can recycle a lot of water, but still you have to start with a decent source of water.
Okay,
there has to also be power becomes both power cost, but more importantly, sustained, continuous power is really important. But that again, situations improved from that perspective. But if you think, fundamentally, labor cost has become such a small portion of our COGS that they then have to also ask, well, is that is that a necessary shift versus the U.S.? I'm not so sure.
Your energy in the U.S. is relatively inexpensive now compared, So, and if you're wholly automated, over the energy is cheap.
And engineering capability is tremendous here, and so you're really looking at how engineering, your developers are where would they be located? So it's a balance, right? As you look at the locations, certainly North America writ large, I think is still attractive. There are opportunities here. Mm-hmm. By the way, Canada is terrific. We have a Toronto operation.
Yeah, always has been pretty good for PCBs, hasn't it? It's interesting, really, and it's for me, it's curious because when as I say, I think PCBs kind of headed east before EMS did. EMS kind of followed, but at the same time or shortly afterwards started to populate places like Mexico and Eastern Europe. And we heard this phrase, I guess, in the early 2000s of China in your own backyard, referring to Eastern Europe as a manufacturing location and to places like Mexico and other parts of maybe Central America. But we didn't hear that about printed circuit boards, and printed circuit boards went pretty quickly, and they didn't come back in the same way.
No, and I think you're right. I think Eastern Europe is another. You could ask the same question about Eastern Europe. Why not more facilities there?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, being an unabashed ambassador for the state of Texas, where we have lots of land, good labor,
and water,
and a lot of water and a lot of energy. Come on down.
And recently, snow.
Yeah, unfortunately, on the beaches in Galveston, right? It was crazy. So
you already have too many Californians in Texas, though. You don't.
I came here 20 years ago so I led the charge, but that is true. So, John, you talked about let's talk about the labor issue there and the skilled labor shortage. A lot of the EMS talk about, we hear executives talking about kind of the lack of skilled labor in the industry that they're struggling with.
Yeah.
You reference that as one of the initiatives within the IPC. Speak to that. So tell us, how's that being represented and how's it being addressed?
Yeah, so every conversation I have with an executive in the industry, they don't have enough skilled people, period. There is, without exception. When we did surveys 3 years ago, they said about 64% of those surveyed said that they couldn't find the engineers, and 66 said they couldn't find the operators they were looking for. And that has just increased in issue. There's a lot of different challenges for our industry. I mean, you have, especially in the US area, you have places like Amazon popping up all over that are now paying about 33% higher wages for unskilled labor. And how do you convince somebody to not go work for a brand like Amazon and then come work in a manufacturing facility? I have very good answers for those questions, but I'm not able to talk to everybody. So I actually think there is a good reason to go work. You know, a starting operator is, you know, somewhere around $14 to $16 an hour in our industry, whereas Amazon can be hiring as high as 20. And so that's a challenge. The other thing is just, you know, on awareness. So that's part of the impetus behind what IPC has been doing. We worked with a lot of industry partners to develop these training programs. And so when we say IPC developed them, it was really, you know, literally dozens of industry experts saying, this is what we need to teach them. This is how we do it. And then we bring that information to the IPC educational experts. And we've distilled that into a program that, you know, the core stuff, like I mentioned, is just 2 days. You can take somebody who is literally flipping burgers or you know, making tacos on Sunday, and on Wednesday they could be on the line as an effective operator for you. That's our electronics assembly operator program. And then there's other modules. It's asynchronous. They can do it when they want, or you can teach it however you'd like. So that's one way we're trying to address this need, because as I mentioned in the solutions area that we're looking at, this is a cry from the industry saying, please help. And our industry, frankly, is about building electronics, not about educating. And that's something that IPC has been doing for decades. And we've continued to shore up our resources on that front. In fact, my doctorate's in education. So maybe that's part of the reason they brought me on. I don't know. But so finding the right people is important in every area, whether it's South Dakota, you know, Milwaukee, Florida, even in Texas.
Yeah. Well, and Phil, you did the interview with Carl Hung here that we did this week, and he referenced they're trying to hire in China there. He's 100.
Yeah, they have skill shortages too, and they have they have a huge number of graduates, but there's a lot more multiple demand for staff.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we find that very much to be the case in China, the real shortages, and while the engineering population is so much greater, even degreed engineers in printed circuit boards, tough to find. And a lot of Chinese companies now going public, they offer very attractive stock, RSUs to folks to move over. And so it's a challenge wherever you operate.
Yeah, the turnover of employees is also, especially in Asia, is radically insane. But even here in the US, we had one OEM company come to us and say, hey, look, there's 3 OEMs right here. We'd find somebody, finally, get them trained up, and they go across the street and make another 50 cents, an hour on average. And then they go to the next place. And so they were fighting over a very scarce resource.
Yeah, I think when I look at China, when I first started traveling to China, you'd kind of make friends or colleagues that you knew very well every time you visited China, which would typically be, 2 to 3 times a year for Nipcon Shanghai, Nipcon Shenzhen. They'd got a new job, a new promotion, they'd moved somewhere else. That whole cycle that we're used to being 2 to 3 years in the US was happening and is still happening in China every 6 to 9 months. So that, that demand is much higher. Tom, sorry, go ahead, John.
I was going to say, at the risk of going back to the topic of our discussion on the US, one of the things that's different in the US versus many of the other, especially Asian countries, is, the Asian countries, they'll put out a 5-year or 10-year plan and they'll invest for the long term. Whereas in the US, you have and so there's a lot of government support to make business attractive in those regions. Here in the US, we saw just the shift in the last 6 months. What a difference in, how an administration might be pushing for better or for worse. And guess what? In another 3.5 years, it could change again. And so some of that is also a challenge to the US. And so, one of the frustrations and challenges we have from an advocacy perspective is we always have to be communicating. And you there's different waves that are riding with different administrations. And so you find the sweet spot, if you will, that can help our industry that's rising under one administration, and then try to ride it to the next administration, whatever funding opportunity they have, with a common thread being, let's help the electronics industry thrive in whatever region. That just happens to be the US change. There's different challenges in Europe on the same, similarly.
Yeah. So Tom, you've got a government that's just about to drop a whole lot of cash for various different stimuluses. Let's say they're going to throw a few billion at the PCB industry. How do you want them to spend it? Let's get real. Let's give you the checkbook, Tom. You start writing checks.
Checkbook, that's terrific.
Thing for a day, Tom.
I think the biggest opportunity. So if you think about what prevents investment here, and I talked about the demand signal, that's one thing. The other piece is capital cost. So helping the industry to defray capital cost. And there's a number of ways to do that, and I'm not an expert by any means on this, but to the extent that we're able to lower our capital costs, the equation today, if you look at a printed circuit board fab and you look at investing in the U.S. or elsewhere for that matter, the return on invested capital is generally not very attractive, and so if you are able to work that investment piece down, now you've got the ability to generate returns. That's going to allow for the sustained investment that would be required. So that would be the single. That's where I would spend my money first, if you will. And I think the other issues that John talked about. I think we have to invest in education. We really have to, and again, sustained investment in STEM education, vocational education, revitalizing that, apprenticeship programs. There are, I can spend those dollars very quickly, but really focused on creating both the labor, helping to deal with the labor challenge, and helping lower capital costs. Those would be the two biggies. Again, demand signal, I'm assuming we're not spending our money there. We just need to sort of tweak some of our requirements on that side.
Those solutions work in the EMS industry too. They're not exclusive to PCB at all. You could take the exact same two answers and push down the EMS industry, and because capital is a challenge. If you want to get the latest, greatest,
and you absolutely do, you
got to lay out some money.
I completely agree. I talk with our EMS partners all the time, and it's exactly that issue that prevents their investment in the U.S.
And that cost has risen and risen and risen over the decades. I don't know what it costs to stand up a state-of-the-art PCB facility now, but I'm guessing it's in the 100 million plus kind of.
You're good. You're good.
Kind of number. Now Eric told me that. Eric gave me that number before the show started, so I can't take complete credit for that. But it's cheap. It's cheaper than building a semiconductor facility, and probably cheaper than building I don't know where you would be with an EMS line.
It's nothing. It's only hundreds of millions.
There you go.
That's right. It's a rounding error.
Not even it doesn't even hit the decimal point in these $1 trillion budgets that are being talked about.
Yeah, there you go. But you're absolutely right. It's funding to build the facility and it's staff to run the facility. It's kind of as simple as that, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. But it is now, I guess I come back to the topic and reflecting again back that it's been discussed for decades now, right? The recognition that this trend has been happening, that the US needs to do something. Here we are talking about doing things. It sounds like I'm talking to you gentlemen that things are happening. This isn't.
We're trying.
Thank you. And I keep thinking, in a post-pandemic world, is now kind of the and interest rates being so damn low right now, right? The cost of money is now almost the most opportune time maybe that we've had in a while to kind of do this. Now you balance that with much larger national debt that we have right now and the concerns that raises, and maybe people being reluctant to, but the current administration, what we're seeing, there's a lot of money evidently that's going to be forthcoming. So, I mean, does that give you confidence that maybe this time around, something's going to happen?
So I'll take a first stab, and you can you smooth it out, Tom, if I mess up. So my view of this is you're still going to have some hesitation on the business front because you're getting mixed business signals from the Biden administration. You know, at one time we're saying, hey, we want to invest in manufacturing. We want to, you know, try to bring some of these technologies back. On the other hand, they're saying, hey, we may rework this whole tax structure thing. And so wherever there is unknowns, there is hesitancy from businesses. And that's where, when I was talking about these 5 and 10-year plans that exist in some countries, that presents knowns. And if that known is attractive, there's more willingness to invest there. And so the more, while these unknowns exist, you're going to get people dragging their feet a little bit because they just don't know when the other shoe is going to drop necessarily in the US.
Yeah, and I would agree. And John mentioned it earlier, but if you were to say, will there be a change regionally? I think that's easier. That's an easier conversation. I think there's a general view that yes, regionalization is underway. But then if you talk specifically to the U.S., that's where you're going to start seeing some of this hesitation. And I agree with John's points. Absolutely.
Okay. Phil, anything to add to that before we wrap?
No, I absolutely agree. I think the regionalization trend is really significant. I think people are railing a bit against globalization and trying to refigure out what the ideal supply chain looks like. I think it's really important that we connect the supply chain all the way from the consumer back to the materials that we take out of the earth, and we make sure we've got all that connected from not just a where is it coming from, but a sustainability point of view. So I think we have to be very, very holistic there. And again, I think that skills thing is huge, and we just need to keep going on that one because that one is a forever job. Education isn't something you do one decade. It's something you just continue to crank up and work on.
Even if we found all those raw materials on some meteor coming by and suddenly all that was solved, you still need to have people who know what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Well put. Well put. Well, gentlemen, you know, I said at the beginning, I thought we just kind of scratched the surface on this one, and I think we gave it a good scratch. I think
good scratching.
We did some good scratching. But thank you for taking the time to share your perspectives and your opinions here. And maybe we can revisit this again sometime in the future because it's not going away and it won't be solved anytime soon. So,
yeah.
And John, I had meant to give more time to you to talk about the various initiatives at the IPC, so we'll do that another time. Okay. But I encourage everyone that who's watching and who sees this that you can get a hold of John or Tom. That you can find them both on LinkedIn. I certainly did. So reach out to them. I think the IPC does some good work in support of our industry, and we all want to stay involved and keep helping them advocate. So.
Thank you.
Yeah. So, gentlemen, again, thank you very much for your time today. Appreciate you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you.